Okay, so let's now talk about loop structures. Yeah. So basically, when you're talking about loop structures, we're talking about programming structures that allow a block of code to be repeated multiple times. All right. So we have a block of code that we are allowed to be repeating multiple times. We're going to be calling that a loop structure. So you see now, loop structures now they come through in two different broad groups. It's either they're going to be count controlled loops, or they're going to be coming through as condition controlled loops. Condition controlled loops. Right? There are loops that are supposed to be running for a designed or for a defined number of times, for a finite number of times. If we know the number of times that a certain block of code is supposed to be repeating, it's best for us to use a count controlled loop. Why? Because we repeat for a known number of times. So we are saying that count controlled loops, they are used when the number of times of repetition is known. So we know the number of times that we're supposed number of times of repetitions is known. So if we know how many times we're supposed to be repeating a certain block of code, it's best for us to use a count controlled loop. And the count controlled loop now is the one that has a for. This is the header, for, true, next. This is how we write the count controlled loop. Condition controlled loops now, on the other hand, they come through again still in two different types. There is a preconditional loop. Then there is a post-condition loop now. It's also a post-condition loop. So for a precondition loop now, we test the condition. The condition will appear before the code that we want to repeat. You get the point? We say that loops, they allow a block of code to be repeated. So before we even start executing the block of code, we first have to test first, right? So we are saying preconditional loops, we are saying that a condition is tested. A condition is tested before even a single execution, of the block of code. So we are saying that on precondition, we only run the code if the condition is true. So we only execute if the condition is true. Once the condition is false, we are getting outside of the loop. Yeah, if the condition is true, that's what happens as far as post-condition, as far as precondition is concerned. And with that now, if we say that we only execute if the condition is true, that means that we might never run the code. We might never run a block of code. Why? If the condition becomes false from the very first test, then we might never. So the block of code may never run in the event that the condition becomes false from the very start, right? And for this reason now, for whenever we're using precondition uses a while. This is the name of the loop now. This is the while, do, and while. That's how we write our code. Okay, let me just set some space there. while do and while. That's the loop header, like this. But when we are talking now about post condition loops, we say that precondition they test before even a single execution. Post condition now they test after at least after a single execution. So condition for post condition now, the condition is tested after a single execution. A single execution. You get the point? Here we only execute if the condition becomes true. So when this condition becomes true, we exit the loop. So we're saying stay in the loop. Stay in the loop as long as the condition is false. So we keep on running as long as the condition is false. Then the block of code, the code always runs at least once. Why? Because we are going to be testing after a single execution. Always runs at least once. All right? And we are saying now the loop structure or the loop which we use now as post condition is the repeat. So we repeat a certain block of code. We repeat the block of code until now the condition happens. You get the point? So it's called the repeat until. So in a nutshell, we have the three types of loops. We have three loops: the repeat, the for loop, the repeat until, and the while do and while loop. These are categories of either count controlled or condition controlled. We use count controlled loops if we know the number of times which we need to run the code. That's when we use count controlled. But if we do not know the number of times but we have a condition, it's best for us to use a count controlled loop. Yeah, that's what we have as far as loops are concerned. So let's now talk about the part on how we write now a for loop. We just have one single code, then we'll write it as a for loop, we'll write it as a repeat until, and we'll also write it as a while loop, right? So we are saying, suppose that we want to write a code that accepts 5 edges or 5 names, 5 country names, right? 5 country names, a code that accepts 5 country names. A code that accepts 5 country names. Let's have it like this. We say now a code that accepts 5 country names. 5 country names, like so. So we already know that we are talking about 5 country names. It will be best for us to use a for loop, which is a count controlled loop. So for that, we can say now, let's just assume that index is going to be our variable here. Index is going to be our variable and is going to be taking the value of an integer. And we'll assume again that country name is another variable. Country name is another variable that is in the form of a string. We just assume that these have been declared already. So number 1, if I'm to use the for loop, I will say now for index. My index starting from position number 1 up until we get to 5, I want to go ahead and say input. Then I put my prompt now, enter country name. Enter country like this. Then we go ahead and put our full colons there. We put our closing quotes there. Then we want to have this stored in a variable called country name. then I'm done. Then I'm using now a next there. So we are saying this code will run first when index is 1, we get a name. When index is 2, we get a name. Index is 3 up until we get to 5. We're going to be repeating all this because we said we're going to be running this as long as index is not yet 5. So index is 1, is 2, is 3, is 4, is 5. We'll be running this code, then we get out. That's basically how the structure of the for loop is going to be looking like. Then let's talk about the part now on assuming that we now want to talk about the part of repeat until. For the ones that you're about to use now, we need a counter. Okay, let's just stick with index. So we're going to be saying now, repeat, we want to use the repeat until, right? So say repeat to do what? To do the input part. Repeat to say input, enter name like this, enter country, then you go ahead and say country name. Country name. Check this out now. The thing that is now a blinder here, that is null of concern is this. Here, index was auto-incrementing, but when we are using this now, the value of index will never increment until you write the code for it to increment. So index is now equal to index plus 1. So I'll run this code when index is, I'll first initialize, let's just say, I'll initialize my index to 0. Let me have my index here, initialized. Okay, I did not write that perfectly. Let's say my index now, before the loop, has been initialized to 1. You get the point? So I'll run this, then I'll increment the value of my index until now. When the value of my index now, when the value of my index becomes greater than 5, then I have to get out of the loop now. So I'll keep on running this code. I'll keep on running this block of code as long as the index is still less than or equal to 5. Once it becomes greater than 5, once this becomes true, right? Once that part becomes true, once this part becomes true, then I have to get out of the loop. Why? Once this becomes true, I have to get out of the loop because I stay in the loop as long as the condition is false. Once it's true, get out. Exit the loop, right? The last thing that I'm going to be having now is the part on having this on a while do loop. Again, I will initialize my index to 1. Then I will start by saying while is the same as, it can be read like as long as the value of index, right, is still less than or equal to, right? Let me just put it like this. Is still less than or equal to 5. I want to go ahead and do this and do the part on inputting. To input, you say enter what? As your prompt, you're giving the description of what you want the user to give you. Country, then we have now the country name. Oh, this is supposed to be a comma there. Country name like this. Then we go ahead and say what? And increment the index. So index is now equal to the value of the index that was already there plus 1. Then I end my while. So one thing that you're supposed to be noting as far as repeat until or my condition control loops are concerned is the part that you need to make sure that they are incrementing the values of the variable that is in question. Yeah, of the variable that is in question, make sure that they are always incrementing, because I have seen many students leaving this part. So you initialize the value of index, then you increment, which is something that you don't need to do when you're using count control loop, because just these 3 lines will do all the magic. So yeah, that's again the syntax of how you're supposed to be putting through loop structures. If you have any question again, please feel free to talk to me, then we'll see how best we can help each other next time.